Okay, hello, and welcome back to that thing we like to call Curless Mania, where we talk all things pop, rock, and prog. Doing something a little bit different tonight. I was supposed to have a guest this week, but for various reasons it didn't happen, and that's okay. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes life gets in the way of us just sitting around talking about our favorite music. But it is also very cold today. It is January in Michigan, and it is literally, I'm not kidding, 5 degrees outside. So it is cold. So I did not have any desire to go outside tonight. I did shovel the driveway, so that was enough. I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done for the night. So I figured I'd do a video tonight, and it's a topic that I've been wanting to tackle for quite some time, actually, and decided tonight's the night. So I am going to talk about a seminal record for me in my lifetime, which is Face Value by Phil Collins, um, which came out in 1981 on Virgin Records. And this is the original that I bought back in the day, the original vinyl. Still in pretty good shape, actually. I kept it in pretty good shape. And then this is, of course, the reissue that he did in 2015, where he went through his whole catalog and updated it, remastered it, dusted him off a little bit, made him a little brighter, punchier, possibly. And he replaced his current face with the old face, or he replaced the old face with his current face. So, which is interesting, different, something very different. I kind of wish they it just stayed with the original cover and maybe put this on the inside or in the back or something. But it was different. It's different, and it's the reissue because you see his older face. And this is a good package. It's got extras on it. It's got a second disc with some live tracks and some demos. We'll talk more about that later because I actually think that this second disc could have been even better, honestly. But we'll get into that in a minute. That's like a whole nother topic. But that's what the record we're talking about. I'm going to call this sort of like the road to Face Value because when Face Value came out, people take it for granted now that Phil Collins is a superstar, and in the 80s people got tired of him because he was all over the place. He was just between Genesis and his solo work. He was just everywhere, just having hits galore. Just every time he touched something, it turned into gold. With did that song Easy Lover with Philip Bailey. He was doing, there's something going on. He was like producing other artists. What was the name of that? Is ABBA? She was in ABBA. Frida. There's something going on, and you hear those drums. And it's like that's totally Phil Collins, and you can tell it's Daryl Sturmer on guitar as well. But he was just so hot that people wanted to work with him because he was just so hot. But you just back in 1979 and 1980, people were not expecting a Phil Collins solo record. They just weren't. And when this album came out, people were like, "Wait, what? Isn't this the drummer from Genesis? Like that's all he was known for. He was known for being a drummer. He had done some work with Brian Eno as a session guy. He had done work with me. He had done work with Peter Gabriel. He had done work with Brand X, of course. He had this Brand X, which was like his sort of jazz fusion side project, doing a couple records with them. Um, but he was just not known at that point of being a writer or a singer. I mean, he was known as, obviously he was singing with Genesis by that point, but he wasn't known as a writer. It was the writing in Genesis was more Tony and Mike, right? So anyway, so let's just do a quick rundown on the record, and then I'm gonna take a left turn. So, Face Value was released on February 13th, 1981, on Virgin. It was recorded in 1979 and 1980 at the Townhouse in London, at Village Recorders in Los Angeles, and at his home. Actually, he did some recording at home doing demos. He used a lot of the demo stuff for basic tracks for this record. It was produced by Phil and Hugh Padgham, which was kind of a new name at the time. He had worked with, he was an engineer who had worked with Steve Lillywhite. And he had done, I know he'd worked on the XTC records. He worked on English Settlement, and he worked on Drums and Wires. So he had done a couple of productions, and then he obviously became a much bigger after this record. He became more of a name. People knew who he was after this album because this album exploded. So, but really at the time, he wasn't this huge name. Um, so he'd also worked on Peter Gabriel 3. So that I think that's where Phil had met him or spent a lot of time with him was during Peter's album, Peter Gabriel 3, which was recorded at the Townhouse as well, same studio, same. So anyway, this album was an instant commercial success. I mean, this album just took off. I mean, as soon as it was released, it became big. Uh, Mostly on the strength of the single In the Air Tonight, which was released before the album came out. And people just responded to that song immediately, which is understandable. It's so unique, and still to this day you listen to it and it's still powerful. It's just got that really kind of ominous opening that just kind of just it just has that sort of pulse at the beginning. It's kind of like a drum machine, and he's just he's doing these just chords on the piano or chords on the keyboard and just like letting it sit. But he's doing a really cool vocal. I mean, by this point, he had sung with Genesis for quite a few years, and he had become a lead singer at this point. And I think that's something that's kind of forgotten is that he really came into his own as a singer by the time of Duke. And by this record, he really because I mean, really by the end of this track, he's really wailing on the vocals. It's pretty cool, actually. The vocal take on this is really incredible. People talk about the drums all the time, of course, the gated reverb and the do 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 do. But really, if you listen to the vocal, he's really doing I can feel it in the air tonight, oh Lord. I mean, he's really just emoting at the end of that song. Um, Anyway, instant commercial success. It was number one on the UK album charts, number seven on the Billboard 200. Eventually sold over 5 million copies in the US and 1.5 million copies in the UK. So it's just a huge success, a massive success of an album. Um, and there's tons of different styles of music on this record. I think people sometimes forget like how diverse this album is. You've got rock, you've got R&B, you've got like slow ballads, you've got instrumentals, you've got Beatles covers. I mean, it's just like it's all over the map. I mean, he just decided he would just do whatever he felt like doing. And he had a lot of different influences as far as just he did love Motown. He loved Earth, Wind, and Fire. He loved Stephen Bishop. He loved he loved jazz fusion. He liked Mahavishnu Orchestra. He liked Brian Eno. There was a lot of stuff that he enjoyed, and he had played on so many sessions, as well as, of course, with all the Genesis stuff. And so I think there was just all these things that were sort of building up in him that he wanted to. He was like, hey, if I'm going to do a record, I'm just going to go nuts and do everything that I like. And that's kind of what he did. And he asked a lot of people to help him, and they all said yes. Like Alfonso Johnson is on this record. Um, who else is on this album? There's a lot of guest stars on this album and he said that everybody that he asked um, said yes. Eric Clapton was going to be on the record, but then he wasn't. He was on the demo of I think Roof is Leaking. Um, so I really didn't do the homework on this, but oh, Stephen Bishop. Eric Clapton is on the record, apparently. I think so. He says Eric Clapton appears. Stephen Bishop is on the album. And then the Earth, Wind, and Fire horns. He called them up and said, I want to use the Earth, Wind, and Fire horns. And they were like, who is this guy? Phil Collins. What? Who? Like, who's this English dude coming asking us to come do, horns on this record? And he didn't even know how to, like, notate. He was just like, oh, I want it to go like this. Ba, ba, da, 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 da. And they were like, what? Like, dude, can't you write it out? And he goes, no, I can't. I'll just play you the track and hopefully you can play along, kind of thing. And I'll tell you what I want. And that's kind of, it ended up working out fine. He got it done. So, but anyway, yeah, so this, the one thing I always like to talk about too is like Genesis was so busy around this time. And I always wonder, like, Phil Collins is a workaholic. He never wants to sit still, right? So, and Genesis was a hardworking band already. So he didn't leave Genesis. He stayed in Genesis. And I always like to talk about the timeline because I always look at stuff and I go, how did he even have time to do this record? Like, how did he even have time to like write and record this album with Genesis schedule the way it was? So I kind of did like my own research on this topic, and I kind of wrote it all out because I just wanted to know. So we start with Then There Were Three. So Then There Were Three was recorded. Excuse me. It was written in 1977 and released on March 31st in 78. This record, which is kind of a dark horse Genesis record. It's very split opinions on this album. Some people some people just don't like it very much. I enjoy it. I think there's a lot of great moments on this album. And Phil's playing the drums, the drum playing on this, I mean, is incredible on some of this tracks and Down and Out, things like that. But anyway, we're not here to talk about this record. So we're talking about how they put this album out. They actually had a hit on this record, Follow You, Follow Me, which was like their first kind of genuine hit of sorts. They had always been this sort of, heavy prog rock band and had an audience, but it was kind of a cultish sort of audience. And then this was the first album where the record company heard that song and went, wait a minute, that sounds like a radio hit. Like, we could put that on the radio. Because it was like a really simple song. It was in fact, Mike Rutherford thought it was like underwritten. Like, he thought it was, maybe at first was like, I don't know. I'm not sure if this song, he kind of had that riff, that ding 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 ding, and they just jammed on that. They just kept jamming on it, and they didn't really change much. They didn't add like all the Genesis stuff that they would do in the past. They just kind of let it roll. And I think Phil was the one who said that. Like, this is good enough. We don't need to add anything more to this. Let's just jam this out, and I'll sing a melody over it. And that's what happened. And they ended up having a hit with it. And that album became big for them because of that song. And I think they actually got a lot more females coming to the shows because it was a love song. It was a very simple, straight ahead love song, which they had never really done before. Maybe they'd done sort of, but not really to that extent. I'm sorry, my voice keeps getting froggy. So never to that extent. Like, it was a very simple, straight ahead love song, and I think the girls liked it, and all of a sudden it was like, guys were going to see Genesis and bring in their girlfriends or their wives or whatever. They were, so they even say in the interviews for that record, they say on the reissue interviews, they talk about how like the audience is almost doubled because all of a sudden they're seeing women in the audience, which they hadn't seen before. So anyway, I'm really getting off on a tangent here. So they went on a long tour to support that record. They did almost 100 shows in Europe, US, and Japan. Between March and December of 1978. So it was a long tour. It was like a long, grueling, but I think they kind of felt like, ooh, like we could hit another level. If we really push right now, we've got a hit on the radio and we feel some momentum. Let's go on a long tour and really like solidify this. And they did. And I have bootlegs of that tour. It's quite good. I talk about that all the time, but there's some. I mean, I love some of the shows, the live shows from that tour sound great to me. Here's a piece of information that comes in handy later. At the end of that tour in Japan, they were given Roland CR78 drum machines in Japan at the end of the tour, and Phil was like, okay, I'm a drummer. What do I need a drum machine for? And in fact, he said he almost like just ditched it because he was like, I'm a drummer. Come on, drum machine. What do I need this for? But he took it just out of curiosity and brought it home and just put it in a corner in his house or something. More on that later. So Phil comes back from this long tour, and apparently his wife at the time, he had his wife Andrea, and he had 2 kids, I think, with her, and she said to him something like, well, if you go on this really, really long tour, I'm not sure what the state of our marriage is going to be like. Like, I don't know if I can just be alone for that long. Or maybe he had done a tour previously and she was not happy, or was like, I don't really want you to go on long tours. And who knows? I don't really know the conversation, but it was something to that effect. And he was like, I got to. I'm a musician. I'm in this band. We're starting to hit it. We're like, things are starting to happen for us. So I can't say no to the tour. I got a tour. So he went on the tour. And apparently when he came back from this long tour, according to all reports, the house was dark. She was gone. She left. She took the kids and left and went to Vancouver. I think that's where her mom was. So she was like, well, see ya, I'm gone. You went on the tour. Remember I told you that? And she was good on her word. She took off. And so he went to the band at that point. He went to Genesis and basically said, look, I've got to go to Vancouver to save my marriage. So if Genesis is going to do more stuff like right now, I can't do it. Or if you guys are insisting on doing stuff right now, I'm out of the band because I got to go fix my marriage. I got to go figure this out. So he's like, so wisely, I think they had realized they couldn't just throw down the gauntlet every time somebody had a problem, which they'd sort of done to Peter Gabriel a little bit. When he was having issues, they were kind of like, "Hey, it's the band or nothing," kind of thing. So I think, but they had gotten older and wiser at this point, and kind of said, "Okay, go sort out your problems. No problem. Mike and I will go do whatever." Tony's talking to him. Mike and I will go do our solo albums, which we've been talking about for a while anyway. So Mike and Tony go do those records behind me, Curious Feeling and Small Creeps Day, which are both pretty damn good as well. Um, but they just say, hey, we got time. We'll have a little bit of downtime. We will go do solo records. You go sort out your marriage, do what you need to do, and then after that we'll come back as Genesis and we'll do more. So that's kind of what they did. And he took off. He went to Vancouver, and apparently after 2 months, he realized that the marriage wasn't going to be saved. For whatever reasons, it was still over, and he essentially just said, "Okay, I guess it's over. I'm going back to England. Can't salvage this thing. It's done." So he comes back to the empty house in England, and Phil is a very restless guy, and he's a workaholic, and he's restless, and he is like, "Look, I'm not just going to sit here in this house and do nothing." So he starts to write. He has a piano in his house, and he starts to like doodle on the piano, and um he looks over in the corner at that box that from Japan with the drum machine in it, and he's like, okay, let me try this thing out. He plugs it in, starts messing with it. Oh, we get some cool little loops here, and he starts playing to these loops on the drum machine. um and also during this time, he starts collaborating with anybody who will ask. I mean, he's basically like, look, anybody who calls me, I'm in. He starts doing stuff with uh one of the bigger things that he does at this time is Peter Gabriel 3, which I already mentioned. Peter Gabriel asks him to come in and play some drums on some stuff, and he goes, "Oh, no problem. Yeah, I'm there." And he comes on over there, and one of the things that they do is a song called Intruder, which basically started with Hugh was trying to get a drum sound, and Phil started playing this pattern, this boom, boom, cha, boom, boom, cha, boom, boom, cha, boom, boom, cha. And he was just doing that over and over again just for Hugh to get his sound, right? And Peter just like hits the button in the talk box in the control room and says, "Hey Phil, can you just play that for like 10 minutes? Just keep playing that pattern. Don't change anything. Just that pattern for 10 minutes. That's what I want." And so Phil's like, "Oh, okay." So he just does it for 10 minutes, and then it becomes Intruder. What does he say? "I try to move quietly across creaky wooden floors." And it's such a cool track. I love Intruder. It's so great. And it's got that Phil Collins gated reverb drum sound. It's very, very cool. And so then, so he's doing all these things while Tony and Mike are gone, and they're like the band's on hiatus, right? And then one night, Tony Smith comes over, the manager of Genesis comes over to Phil just to see how he's doing. Like, "Hey, how you doing, man?" And they hang out for a little bit, and Phil's like, "Hey, yeah, I've been writing some stuff. I've been kind of doing some demos at home." And he's like, "Oh, really? Oh, cool. Oh, really?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll play you some. You want to hear some?" He goes, "Sure." And he plays him a couple demos, and Tony Smith is like, "Whoa, these are really good. Like, holy moly, these demos are amazing. Like, you did these yourself?" He's like, "Yeah." So it's like, okay, these have potential, man. You might want to, this you might want to do something with this stuff. And so then, I don't know the timeline on this, but then like I guess maybe Tony had told Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford that, hey, Phil's got like a bunch of demos that he's kind of sitting on. You might want to check them out. And so and then also Tony and Mike came over to Phil to see how he's doing. How are you? He's basically like, "Hey, come on over to my house. We can hang out and we can rehearse. We can rehearse Genesis at my house because I got, it's empty. Come on over." So I think they started moving all their gear to Phil's house, and they started thinking about rehearsing and writing for the next record, which would end up being Duke. So the next Genesis record is Duke, but at this point it's not called Duke. It's just writing and recording for the next album, whatever that's going to be, right? So Mike and Tony say, "Hey, let's hear those demos that we heard about." And he's like, okay, and because at this point he didn't know if he was going to do a solo record or just anything. He just and Genesis was his main, was his vehicle for for songs, right? So he was first, he was like, you guys can take whatever you want, like go, let's listen to some stuff, and they end up listening to a lot of stuff, and they wanted the two that they picked out of the all the songs were Misunderstanding and Please Don't Ask. And it's funny because talks about how Please Don't Ask was like it's probably the most personal song that he had. I mean, that one was super personal about his divorce, and they wanted that one, so he's like, okay. So, and here's the controversy is that apparently, according to Tony, he's like, he never played us in the air tonight. He's like, I would have remembered that. He didn't play us in the air tonight. And Phil's like, I did. I played him everything. He's like, Genesis at that point was like my only thing. I wanted it to be on a Genesis record. It's like, believe me, if he had, I played them everything I had. It's what he told him. He's like, I'm telling you, but Tony denies it. Here's my theory on that. Quickly, I'm doing a lot of sidebars here, but here's my quick theory on that. Is that I've heard the demo of In the Air Tonight. It's not quite the same, and the gated reverb drums don't ever kick in. It's just that pulse. It's just that I can feel it coming, and it's a cool, but it's not. It never has that shut up. It never has that huge like kick in, and it doesn't have them like really impassioned vocal, and I don't think it's quite the same. If you listen to the demo, it's like I could see how they'd be like, oh, that one's pretty good, but like they could pass it by, and not. So that's my theory. I don't know if it's true. It's just the Curlis Mania theory. Tell me, I don't know. This is me. So anyway, he also, again, this is another timeline thing. I'm not sure when this happened, but apparently he also plays the demos for Amit Erdogan, who is the president of Atlantic Records. I think Amit was like, he knew that Genesis was on the rise, and he wanted to make sure that Genesis stayed together. That's my theory on this. There's my another theory is that, these guys are all making solo records. And he's like, okay, well, let's get back to Genesis because Genesis is doing pretty well. That last album did pretty well. And I want to make sure you guys capitalize on that momentum. You got good tour. Let's do another album, So I think that was just why he was visiting. Who knows? But anyway, Phil played him the demos. And apparently Ahmet Erdogan was like, hey, man, these demos are amazing. Like, oh, I'm trying to do my Ahmet Erdogan impression, but he's like, hey, man, man, this is great. Like, this is really good. And I guess Phil was like, we got to, Ahmet said to Phil, we've got to do something with this. You've got to do a record. Like, it's going to happen. He's like, it's going to, you got to do something with this. And he said that his confidence level went way up because, someone like Ahmet Erdogan says, this is great, you got to do something. It's like, okay. Definitely. That guy heard a ton of music. For him to be that excited about it was a big confidence boost for him. So anyway, so then they start like rehearsing. Tony and Mike come to Phil's house and they start writing and rehearsing stuff for Duke. And apparently, they start jamming a lot. They're doing like Duke's End and Duke's Travels and Behind the Lines and stuff like that. Because they said that they were doing a lot of co-writing by that point. Because it was like they'd all made solo records. Obviously, they're kind of out of material. So it was like, let's just get together and jam. And that's kind of what they did. And they came up with all these cool jams, which they always did. They had done that since Trick of the Tail, to be honest. Because Steve Hackett wasn't at the beginning of Trick of the Tail. It was just three of them. And they came up with Dance on a Volcano. So there was always, I always say this, I still to this day, there was magic between those three. Between Mike, Tony, and Phil together, that was magic. Okay, there was something there. And of course, Hackett added to it. I loved Steve Hackett. He definitely added to it. And I think that Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering are amazing records. And it was sad that Hackett left. But I still love the three-piece Genesis. I'm one of those guys. I love the prog stuff, and I do like the three-piece Genesis. The only place where for me they fell off the cliff was We Can't Dance. That was like, I was like, oh, this album's not that good. Like, I still to this day think that album's just, something's wrong. Like, I think Phil was checked out by that point or something because it just doesn't have the same magic. Like, parts of Invisible Touch I think are great. Like, sure, the title track gets a little old after a while, but things like Domino, I love Domino. I love Throwing It All Away. I love, what's the Brazilian? I mean, there's a couple really cool tracks. Tonight's a cool track. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff on Invisible Touch, and the passion is still there. Whereas I feel like on We Can't Dance, the passion just kind of like goes away. Another huge long sidetrack. Sorry about that. But that's always been my thing. It's like that's when things kind of fell apart, and it wasn't shocking to me that Phil left right after that record because it was like that album just wasn't the same. There was something missing. It's just I think somebody online called it weak tea, and I thought that was like such a great description for it. It's weak tea. It's like it's just not primetime Genesis at all. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. Where were we saying? Oh yeah, so they're rehearsing for Duke. So they've got Misunderstanding and they've got Please Don't Ask, and then they're jamming like these other tracks, and then basically Duke is recorded June to December 1979 and released on March 28th, 1980. Again, Duke. An amazing record. I love this album. Love Duke. I just think this is just, I don't know, just something great about this record. So anyway, and I love the sound of it and the feel of it, and it's a great record. And so anyway, we'll talk about that later. I'm going to sidetrack again. So Misunderstanding is a big hit off the album. Misunderstanding was one of the demos for Face Value. So it's like, okay, Misunderstanding is one of the big hits, and it's kind of got that Sail On Sailor, that I sailed an ocean, down an ocean, and or like he said, Toto hold the lines, kind of hold the line, down, 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 Jeff Porcaro thing. So yeah, it's kind of got that rhythm, and I remember hearing it. It was on the radio like all over the place, and there was a video for it they filmed a video, and I just remember hearing that song on the radio a lot. So that was a hit. Like they did follow up that last record with another big hit, which is Misunderstanding, and it was one of Phil's songs. So once again, his confidence level's going up again because he's like, okay, I just gave you this song from my demo pile, and it became a big hit. So it's anyway, so they go on tour for Duke, and it's 1978, well no, sorry, March to June 1980. And so they do North America, they do Europe and North America. So, no, a 78 date tour. Here it is. Sorry, I can't read my scribbles. It's a 78 date tour across Europe and North America. So they go on another mammoth tour right after Duke, right? So they put out Duke in March 1980, and they immediately go on tour again. So they put out another album, did another big tour. So you're like, man, they have to be exhausted, right, after that long tour. But then Phil, just as soon as he gets home, man, he's like back, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go record the demos that I have. I'm going to go do them properly with Hugh. So he basically, from July 1980 to December 1980, he finishes Face Value, and he goes in the studio and records it properly. And then it's released on February 13th, 1981 on Virgin. So, and then In the Air Tonight was, again, they were the lead single, and it did amazingly well. So then it's let's see, and it goes right to number 2 on the UK charts, which is just insane, right? I'm sure Tony and Mike were like, wait, what? How did your album just go to like number 2 on the charts? Like I think they were kind of flabbergasted. They were like, oh my God. Like, I think they were a little bit slightly panicked. I mean, but they had just done Duke, so maybe they weren't panicked, because it was like Duke was a great record, and they had collaborated more than ever on Duke, and I think they all enjoyed making that record. So I think they had a little bit of like, oh no, like, because their albums, behind me, these albums did not go to number 2, not even close. And so it was like, all of a sudden, it was like Phil was like the guy. He had just written the big hit on Duke, and now he's making an album, and he really just released a solo record that just went straight up the charts. So it's like, oh my God, whoa. So now he's really becoming sort of like almost the lead guy in Genesis. So the dynamic really, like, serious shift in dynamics at this point within the band. So, but I think Phil was enjoying being in Genesis, so it wasn't like he wanted to leave. He was enjoying it. He loved the collaboration. He loved the music they were making, so he wasn't ready to like bail or anything. But I think Tony and Mike were a little bit like, oh boy, I hope he doesn't leave. Like, Jesus, like, So anyway, so what's funny to me is like Abacab's really not far after that, and that was always the thing, like the timeline thing again, where it's like Abacab came out like not that long after. So how did they already, like, he puts out a solo record and then boom, Abacab's out like not long after. Abacab is March to June 81 and released in September 18th, 1981. I was 12 years old. And I remember like being so psyched about Abacab. I was all in when I heard the title track because I had already liked Duke. I'd already purchased Duke and loved Duke, so I was waiting for Abacab to come out. So really, it's like his solo record, Face Value, came out the same year, right? I mean, they moved quick back in the 80s. I mean, it's like this album comes out, it's released February of 81, and then Abacab comes out in September of 81. So it's like he put out 2 records in a year. It's like one solo record and one with Genesis. And it's like, and plus did a tour with Duke. So it's like, oh my God. I mean, they were just working their butts off. They just did not stop. Because it's just almost like mind-boggling how much music they put out at that time. It's crazy. And this is, I mean, again, a lot of people, this is another divided record, or some people don't really like this album. Who done it? I could do without. But this is another album like play producer, because they had enough for a double record on this. So I'm not even going to go into this because I'm going to do I'm going to do You're the Producer Abacab version. I'm going to do that because you can totally do that with this album. So stay tuned. There's going to be another video, play producer with Genesis Abacab. Whoever wants to do it, let me know. Get in contact with me. I'll do it myself. Either way. But okay. Anyway, so that's the timeline. That was a long timeline with lots of sidebars there. But Face Value is just a phenomenal record. It just is. And I still think it's probably his best record. If it really comes down to it, for me personally, I think it's his strongest solo record. I'm not going to go into his whole discography. I'm just going to say this is my favorite. And it starts out with In the Air Tonight. What a great beginning. I mean, just that it's just an amazing single. And it has that ominous feel, and then when it kicks in with the drums, it's just irresistible. Even to this day, even now, when I listen to it now, I still love it. This Must Be Love is a nice ballad. It's a good ballad. I enjoy it. And that's kind of him saying, like, I did meet somebody else after them. I mean, there's a lot of divorce songs on here, but this is kind of like his, I can meet somebody else and find love again kind of thing. Behind the Lines is like a funky version of a Genesis song, obviously. And I had heard that this came up because they were playing back Behind the Lines with Genesis, and they did it on a faster speed to save time. And when they listened to it back, it almost sounded kind of funky. It was like, and they were listening to it, and they were like, kind of like, whoa, this almost sounds like Michael Jackson or something when it was sped up. And so Phil kept that in his mind. He's like, I'm going to do that version. I'm going to do a funky version of Behind the Lines. And he does. It's with the, Earth, Wind, and Fire horns. It's cool. The Roof is Leaking is a kind of a really moody piano ballad, and it's kind of like a story song. It's kind of Genesis-y in a way, because it's sort of a story song, like, the roof is leaking and the wind is howling, and I hope, what is it? I woke up this morning, my hands were frozen, tried to fix the fire, but that damn thing's too old, and it's sort of like a story song. You can kind of have a picture in your mind of what's going on. And I hope spring comes quickly, because otherwise we're going to freeze to death, kind of thing. It's very moody and very good. I think that's the one Eric Clapton plays on, if I'm not mistaken. Droned is kind of like it's sort of like just, this is where things get weird. It's like sort of like an interesting kind of instrumental where it's like almost Indian-esque, like it's kind of ding 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 ding. It's just this really kind of cool instrumental. Very, very different, really. Hand in Hand is kind of another instrumental that has like children singing on it, but it's a little more poppy. It's a little more mainstream kind of. It still has that, and he would play Hand in Hand a lot live because people would dig it. People were into it, and that na 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 no 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 no, pretty cool stuff. I Missed Again, great opening for side 2. Very sort of Motown-y. This is kind of his Motown coming out. He even does that drum fill like, that's a very Motown fill, and that bow, I mean, it's very funky, kind of funky Motown-y kind of vibe, and it works well. It's a great. I think that might have been the second single. You Know What I Mean is another sort of mellow, kind of ballad-esque kind of song that I enjoy. Thunder and Lightning is kind of an upbeat, another sort of R&B-ish kind of song that I enjoy. Um, Good stuff. Or no, wait, I might be messing that up with I'm Not Moving. Um, no, it's Thunder and Lightning is sort of the R&B-ish one, and then I'm Not Moving is kind of more like, um, it's kind of like more of a pop song, which is good. I mean, I'm Not Moving has a good hook to it. I'm not moving, I'm not going anywhere. It kind of has it has a little bit of, again, that sounds like something Genesis could have done, you know. Um, and then If Leaving Me Is Easy is like really R&B. It's like slow burn R&B, which is so weird that Phil Collins would be doing a song like this. It just, but it works so well. And I think Arif Mardin, I think is does the arrangement and the strings in the background. It's cool, man. It's a very authentic sounding sort of slow burn R&B track by this like white English dude. It's bizarre. And he does it so well. Like he does a great effort with that, and he gets away with it. He does it full on. It's great. And then he does I Love Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, you would think, man, that's really ballsy to cover the Beatles. Revolver. I mean, like, really? Wow. But he kind of makes it his own. He does the whole, he does the Ringo fill, the doom da doom 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 da, and it's like it just it's like drone. It just continues the whole way, and he just adds all these different layers of kind of psychedelic sounds, and he works well. I don't know, it works well. He gets away with it. He does a good version of it, actually. And whenever I listen to this album, I always crank this up, and I enjoy it. I think he did a great version of it. It's kind of slowed down, and it's I like it. And he sings it well. He has all these like harmonies coming in and out of the mix, and it's very cool. So yeah, I mean, a very strong solo debut from Phil Collins, Face Value, very very strong. And I still, to this day, when I was listening to it, getting ready for this, and it's still very very strong. I still think it's a very strong record. And his vocals are great. His drumming, of course, is great. I mean, the drumming is like no problem for him. But he's a killer. And it's funny because the Earth, Wind, and Fire guys are like, man, he looks really conservative over there. But man, when he gets behind the drums, he's bad. Like, that guy's awesome. Like, it's just funny because he looks like this proper English gentleman, and he gets behind the drums and he's just kicking ass, So they were like, wow, this guy can play. I'm like, yeah, he definitely can play. But yeah, so he. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight this. And also, last thing, if you haven't seen the documentary, it's on Drumeo channel, I think it's called, where his son Nick interviews him, and it's really fascinating. All they talk about is like his drumming career. They don't talk about his solo songs, or I mean, it's a little bit. They touch on his solo stuff a little bit, but they mostly talk about his drumming and his drums, and it's just really cool because he's one of my favorite drummers of all time. There's no question, and he deserves a lot of accolades. He really does. I think people just kind of write him off because they don't like his solo material, but I think they're missing the boat, man. That guy's just a monster drummer. You listen to the Brand X Unorthodox Behavior, or even one of my favorites is the Live Lamb recording from the box set from Los Angeles. Whew, he's just kicking ass all over that. It's just unbelievable. It's like, God, that guy can play. And that might have been the height. He even says it might have been the height of his playing was the Lamb tour. He's just killing it. But anyway, that's it. I'm not going to go any more sidebars. This has been long enough. So I want to say thank you if you've stayed with me this long. Thanks. Hope you let me know. Let me know what you think about Face Value. Let me know in the comments. What's your take on this album? What do you think? Obviously, I enjoy it a lot. I like it a lot. But what do you think? And of course, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I have to say it every time. I mean, just hit the like button and also hit subscribe, because if it just helps the channel. It helps me want to do more. If the more subscribers I get, the more momentum the channel gets, and then I can actually feel like I can be excited and motivated to do more. So, because it shows me you guys are liking what I'm doing. So that's another big thing. And I'm trying to upgrade. You can see I got the new microphone, new headphones. I got I got a bunch of new gear. I'm trying to up my game a little bit. So hopefully you're enjoying that. So anyway, that's it. We'll see you next time. Take out Face Value. Take a listen to it. Again, crank it up. We'll see you next time on Curless Mania. See ya.